Welcome to the Google Shopping Hangouts on Air. I'm Steve Roth. I'm a group product manager on the Google Shopping team, and today we'll talk about best practices for product feed optimization. This is a series of Hangouts that we've held, including the past ones on feed basics and GTIN optimization. If you haven't viewed these videos before, please do so. They're really interesting content that provides the basics for Google Shopping feeds. And for GTIN requirements, obviously it's an important requirement for Google Shopping. It's another Hangout I highly recommend that you view. Today's topics will be more advanced, so it's really good if you don't know the basics to start with those Hangouts first. Today, we're going to talk about feed optimization in 4 key areas. The first thing is that we'll talk about how to prioritize your efforts. There's a significant amount of work that goes into optimizing feed content. So we'll talk about how do you figure out what to do and what priority to do those things in. The second thing we'll talk about is optimization. So we'll get into the details of how to optimize things like titles and images so that you can get better performance on Google Shopping. Next, we'll talk about differentiation. It's important for you to differentiate your products from your competitors, especially when you're selling the exact same products. And so we'll talk about some options you have on Google Shopping on how to make sure your listings are different from your competitors. And finally, we'll talk about experimentation. Everything I'm talking about today are best practices that we've proven by doing experiments. But every retailer is different, and your goals are different, your products are different. And so it's really good to experiment with these techniques on your own data to see what works or doesn't work for your purposes. Towards the end, I'll spend a minute or two talking about the new feed spec, the new feed specifications. There are some few changes being made that are being enforced later this year. We'll talk through those just so you're aware of that. And then finally, we'll close with about 15 minutes of questions and answers. On your screen, you can submit questions anytime throughout the presentation by clicking the button in the lower right corner. And submit your questions throughout, and I'll answer them towards the end. So about 30 minutes of content, 15 minutes of questions. And everything that we're covering today will be recorded, and you can watch later on the YouTube channel for Google Shopping if you need to refresh your memory or share this with other people who might be interested in the content. So let's start by stepping back and looking at the big picture. It's very easy to get caught in the minutia of managing product data feeds. There's lots of products, lots of different fields, lots of complexity. But if we take a step back, what we're really trying to do here is use product feeds to create really good product ads. And so let's look at how to analyze the ads that you're creating and the user experience from end to end that starts with the ad and goes all the way through your checkout process. And then that'll help prioritize the efforts for getting better performance and then identifying how much investment to make in your product content. So let's start with the content from a consumer's perspective. So when Google is delisting products or suspending accounts, the reason it's doing that in almost every case is because your data is creating a bad user experience. And we're very focused on trying to create really good user experiences so that consumers can come to Google Shopping, find the products they want to buy from their trusted resellers, and buy the products all the way through the process. And so that's the kind of experience we want to have for every consumer. If your data doesn't reach that bar, it's going to cause product delistings. But more importantly, it's going to create a bad user experience. It may affect the brand impression that your consumers have. So you want to make sure there's a really good product data from that perspective. And if you walk through the buying process from the ad all the way through the checkout, you're going to find that there are often gaps in that process that confuse consumers or cause delays. And those kind of things will hurt conversion rates. So you're going to be paying for clicks that won't convert or not getting the click in the first place for consumers that do want to buy your products. So it's very important to start with the user in mind. So in this ad, for example, when I see this ad, it's a really good ad. I've got a high quality image. The title has relevant information. The ratings and reviews help me understand if this is a really good product and accurate price and tax and shipping. When I click through to your site, I want to make sure that the content is the same, so I'm not confused as a consumer. When I go through the checkout process, I want to be able to buy that product quickly and easily. So start from that perspective. Look at the ads from a consumer perspective and see what flaws you have in the process, because that will help you prioritize your efforts. So in terms of prioritization, many retailers have tens of thousands, sometimes millions of SKUs in their catalog. And so what's important to do is segment your products from the most important to the least important, and pay attention to the ones that matter the most. So in this example, for if you sell iPhones and it's your best-selling product on your site, then any issue with that product should be paid attention to first. And if you have some obscure product that no one ever clicks on anyways, if the content's bad, it doesn't matter because no one's going to notice that it's bad. So start with the most important products and make sure you've got all the required content like images and titles and price and availability. And then focus on optimization of that content as a second step. But by doing this kind of prioritization, what you end up doing is making sure your efforts are focused on what's most important and most impactful to your business. And what you'll discover through that process is that identifying product problems with a few products will identify potential systemic problems to the rest of your content. And so you'll make those optimizations and you'll have a lift beyond just the top products, but likely will affect all the rest of your products as well. You should view product content as a strategic investment for your business. This isn't the case anymore where most ads are general branding ads. Product-specific ads powered by product feeds are very common now. So it's not just a feed for Google Shopping, but if you're investing in your product content, it's going to help your social advertising programs and your remarketing programs and other shopping engines and so on. So an investment in your product content will deliver performance in many of your channels, which are becoming increasingly important over time as more product-based advertising becomes kind of the standard now as opposed to an exception as it was a few years ago. Okay, so now from the big picture perspective, now drilling in a bit to the specific techniques for optimization. Again, the previous hangout covered the mechanics and the basics of delivering good feeds. This is more about optimizing content for performance. How can you get better titles and images to get better results on Google Shopping? So let me go through some best practices. So the first one, let's start with title. Titles is the most important field to focus on because it's indexed for search, it's visible in the ads, it's a really critical field to focus on. And so here are some tips and tricks for how to create really good product titles. The first thing is to recognize that there's 150 characters that you can use for product titles. You don't have to use all of them. You want to make sure you don't keyword stuff to fill it. But if you've got interesting content to include in the title, make sure you include all that content in your titles. And that includes things like brands and brands and color and size and so on that are interesting to consumers looking for that product. You do want to front load content if possible so that when Google truncates your titles in certain ad formats, the content that's visible is the most important content. And the one tip there is that if the content is visible in the image, like the color, for example, then it's not important to include it in the front of your title because it's visible to the consumer in the ad through the image. However, things like size, if it's a television set, sometimes it's very difficult to tell if it's a big TV or a little TV. So having the size in the beginning of the title is very helpful to make sure that consumers know when they're clicking through that it's either a very small TV or a very big TV based on what that consumer is looking for. So make sure you put content in the front of your titles that's most valuable to the consumer making that buying decision at that moment. You don't want to over-optimize titles, and that's a key thing that we see happen in some cases where people are using, swapping out different synonyms for words and so on, and when the person sees the ad and they click through, they don't recognize that it's the same product because so much of the content has changed. And so we recommend not doing that because you're going to confuse the consumers, and it can also cause suspension issues if you're abusing that process. In many cases, the Google search algorithms understand synonyms of different words, so you don't have to switch out different words like laptop and notebook because the Google algorithms understand that those are the same type of product. Another tip for titles is that if you see that your product titles are duplicate, so if you have 1,000 products that all have the word t-shirt as the only part of the title, then it's a good indication that you should be adding more content to differentiate your own products. So for a t-shirt, for example, is it for men or women? Is it, what color is it? What size is it? Is there anything on the t-shirt that makes it unique? Those are all things to include in titles so that you're attracting the right consumers to those products. And the important thing there is that the duplicate titles are an indicator that there is more content that you should probably add to your titles. Another tip is that things like plus size or maternity or petites, those are phrases that are really good to include in titles when they apply to your products because of two reasons. One is that if people are not looking for those special sizes, then if you don't have it in the beginning of your title, people may click on products thinking it's a regular size, and they find it's a plus size, and they're going to abandon that click. And you've wasted a click. You paid for a click that's not going to convert. Conversely, people that are looking for those specific sizes, even though it's a smaller audience, they're much more likely to buy. So you want to attract that audience to your products by highlighting those aspects of your products. We do find that there are a number of products that are very hard to explain to consumers or confuse people when they see it. One example is Halloween costumes for pets, where if you don't have an indicator in the product or the product title or the image that it's for pets, you may get lots of clicks on the product that won't convert. There's an important point behind this, which is on your own site, if you're a pet retailer and you only sell pet products, describing the product without describing that it's for a pet is perfectly fine, because the context of your site describes it as being for pets. But you take that product title out of that context and put it on Google Shopping, and now it just looks like a regular Halloween costume. And so making sure that your titles describe that unique aspect, that it's for a dog or whatever the case is really critical to making sure you're not getting what I call curiosity clicks, so people clicking through thinking it's something, and in fact it's something very different than that. And finally, make sure that you use words like personalized or customizable if that applies to your products. Again, the idea is make sure your products are differentiated. If you've got a product that you can have engraved, a custom engraved, then highlight that, because that's a unique selling proposition for that product. So these are some tips for what to include in titles to attract the right audience to your products and to convert better. I won't dwell on the details on this slide for the sake of time. However, this will be viewable in the video on YouTube afterwards. But use common sense. Whatever attributes are relevant for a given product, include them in them. So consumables, the size and the quantity and so on are really valuable. For electronics, the size of the TV screen and so on, the different features are really valuable. So this is a kind of a guideline of tips and tricks for how to create really good titles. Okay, let me shift now to images. So I'll mention this later, but the image requirements are increasing because we want to show really high quality images on Google Shopping. Now with the new mobile phones, especially, that have really good resolution screens, small images look blurry and fuzzy, and they create a bad impression for your products and for your brand. So we recommend creating really large image, sending us the largest image you have available in your system. We often find that in the image URLs that are provided, there are parameters that actually show the size of the image. And so by doing that, it's creating a situation where you're sending us smaller images and hurting performance and creating a kind of a bad consumer experience, when in fact you have really good images that are available on your own site. So if you see this kind of situation with your image URLs, ask your IT team for what's the URL format that gives us the biggest image possible, and update your feed to include that image URL. Prototype optimization is the next thing to focus on. So after title and image, prototype is something that through experiments we've identified as something that's relevant for search, but also helps Google categorize your products, and it's a great structure to include for your shopping campaigns. So it's really important to have really good prototypes. If your prototypes are 1 or 2 words, you should probably look for other things that you can add to differentiate to clarify what the product is. Typically the breadcrumbs on the top of your site. So if your site has kind of a list of all the different categories, from apparel to women's apparel to shoes to sandals, that becomes a very good string of categories to use in the prototype field. Okay. Google product category is also valuable. It's important to get at least 2 or 3 levels deep into the taxonomy. The difference between prototype and Google product category, for those that are confused about that, prototype is freeform. It typically represents your representation of the categories. It's how you describe it on your own site. Google product category is Google's version of that. So as a standard taxonomy, it needs to match the values that we publish. And so that's the difference between those 2 fields. Color optimization is something that we see a lot of questions and confusion about. So let me talk through this a bit. The color field in the feed needs to match the color that's on your landing page. It's very common for retailers now to use what I'll call marketing colors. So in this example, midnight blue is, or sorry, Midnight Sky is the name of the marketing color, when in fact it's a dark blue color. In the color field, you must provide Midnight Sky as a color, because when the person clicks through, the drop-down list of your colors is going to have Midnight Sky as the option to choose. They need to match exactly, not just from a consumer perspective of matching together, but also from the Google crawler, making sure it can recognize which variant of product that you're looking at. So it's very important to use that. Same thing's true for size. The size needs to match. Same thing's true for the title field. If you're including color in the title, you need to include the color name that's on your on your landing page for the same reason. It needs to match so you don't confuse consumers. It's not a best practice, but if you want to do this, you can add the standardized color name in parentheses. We've run experiments to see if this makes a difference in performance, and it really doesn't, not a negative or positive. So you can do it if you want, but it's not a proven best practice. We don't recommend doing it, but it's something that if you feel like it's important for you to do, again, it's a great example of where you can experiment with your data to see whether it works well for you. But it's not something that we've typically seen perform better. Product variants are an important thing to focus on going forward. You're advertising the color and size variants for products on Google Shopping, and getting that data correct and clean is really, really important. And so what we recommend doing is to focus on creating really good product variant data, making sure that the variant in the feed matches the landing page, make sure the color of the product matches, and so on. So in this example, we have a red jacket that's size 38. It's unfortunately very common for retailers to advertise that variant and then click through to the retailer site where that variant is not selected. You have to select the size and color again. So think of that experience from a consumer's perspective, and think of it on a mobile device where I've already picked the jacket in red size 38. That's the product I want. When I go to the retailers, when I go to your site, and I have to reselect the size and color that I just selected in the ad, it creates a barrier to entry, a barrier to conversion. And so what you should do in that case, and it's a barrier especially because of mobile devices and having to do the extra clicks, what you should do is pre-select the size and color when the person comes to the landing page so they don't have to do that extra work. And often it's just done through a URL parameter, as you can see on the slide, where the color and size are pre-selected, and your website recognizes that URL parameter and picks the appropriate sizes. So this is something to really focus on. This is becoming much more important as Google Shopping evolves. Purchase on Google, for example, this needs to be this needs to be perfect data, because the purchase is occurring on Google in those cases, and you want to make sure that the content's exactly right. So there are really important cases where it has to be exactly right. But in general, consider this to be a trend going forward of making sure your product variant data is really high quality. And finally, for this section, it's really important to automate and monitor the performance. This is more of the mechanical side, but it's something to not overlook because it's really important. There's still retailers that upload their feed manually, and they do it once every 30 days, which is the absolute minimum requirements. But to get really good performance, you should be updating your feed as often as your prices change. So at a minimum, I'd recommend once a day. If you make changes throughout the day in terms of pricing, best thing to do is to use the various options that Google provides. One is called the Online Product Inventory Update feed. And that feed format's very simple. It's just SKU, price, and availability. And you can include all your products or just the delta of the ones that changed. So a very small feed that gets processed very, very quickly. And you can deliver it as many times throughout the day as you want to. So that's one way to keep your price and availability up to date using the feed format. You can also use a content API for near real-time updates. This is really important because this is the kind of information that consumers rely on. They want the price and availability to be accurate, and you want it to be accurate as well from a performance perspective, because if the price is different, they'll be confused and may abandon the sale. If they click on an in-stock product and on your landing page it's out of stock, you wasted a click. So it's really important to get this right. Another technique you can use is to use schema.org tags on your landing pages so that we can turn on automatic item updates as a method for keeping the price and availability up to date. And the way this works is that schema.org is a standard that's used by lots of different companies, not just Google, to recognize the content that's on your landing pages. And so without going into great detail here, it's basically putting your SKU, price, and availability into hidden code on your landing page that the Google crawler and other crawlers can find and recognize. If Google finds that there's a discrepancy with price or availability, what it'll do is it'll update that if automatic item updates is turned on. And so you've got a price, let's say, that's off by a little bit, that price will be updated automatically. If your availability, your feed says it's in stock, your website says it's out of stock, Google will fix that automatically when it discovers that kind of discrepancy. If you don't have this approach, if you don't use automatic item updates, those products will be disapproved, and you won't have any opportunity to sell those products. So you want to make sure that you use this option. Your IT team, will likely understand what schema.org tags are, and you can help and encourage them to implement this feature for you. And finally, what we see it to be very common where, because of turnover in retail organizations, that email alerts for suspension warnings are going to someone that doesn't work at your company anymore. So what we recommend doing is creating a distribution list and having the alerts go to that distribution list. That way, as people join the team or leave the team, you can keep that distribution list up to date and make sure that you always are alerted to different errors that occur. Also within Merchant Center, there's the message archive that shows you all the history of all the messages that were sent out. So it's a quick glance, that you can check to see what you might be missing based on email mix-ups and so on. So you can always see all the messages that are occurring there. Okay, so I'm going to shift now from optimization to differentiation. So optimization is getting your products into the auctions, getting the visibility of the products, making sure that consumers click through and so on, but you still have a competitive aspect to be aware of. So there's a number of different techniques that Google Shopping offers today to focus on your product, what's unique about your product and your retail experience. So one of which is the merchant promotions. This doesn't require a promo code for every offer anymore as it did in the past. So take a look at this again. If you're not using it, look at merchant promotions as a way to differentiate your products from your competitors. Product ratings and trusted stores are critical. Consumers want that confidence in your brand and in the product before they buy. So showing that up front will draw people's attention to the products that have high quality scores and to the retailers that are trusted. And finally, if you're a multi-channel retailer, use local inventory ads as a way to drive people to the stores, obviously, but also to differentiate your listings, because consumers that want the option of buying online or locally can recognize that they have both options from buying from you. And so that's an important aspect of advertising and differentiating your products, is show that you have an in-store option as well as an online option. And finally, let's talk about experimentation. So like I said, best practices are based on experiments that we've run over time over a wide variety of retailers to identify what works and what doesn't work. However, every retailer is different and has different experiences. So let me talk through an experimentation methodology we recommend that you use. There are a number of retailers that will do experiments where they'll make a change and look at the last 30 days and the next 30 days and see what kind of change there was in performance. And that's a good starting point, but the flaw is that there could be lots of other things that cause change between those two time periods, including sale events that you might have, or seasonality, or new products that were added in, and so on. What we recommend instead is to create a controlled experiment where you're doing concurrent testing between a control group and a treatment group. And so the best way to do that is to take your products, and let's take an example where you want to add brand to the title for all your running shoes. And so you want to add Nike and Adidas and Reebok and so on to the titles. And you don't currently have them in the titles today. So what you would do is take all your running shoes and split them into 2 equal groups randomly. And one easy technique for that, among others, is just if your SKU is a numeric value, odd SKUs go in this group and even SKUs go in that group. And that should be a pretty good randomization of your SKUs. And then apply the add branded title rule to the treatment group and leave the control group alone. And because of randomization, that's going to limit all the different variances of bid changes and seasonality and so on. So you can compare the 2 groups together over time to make sure that you can see the lift that occurred, or maybe didn't occur, between the treatment group and the control group. You typically want to run the experiment for 30 days or more so that you can collect enough data to have a valid, statistically valid analysis of the data. It really depends on how group big the category is and how much traffic your site gets. But it's really important to look at all the key metrics, not just impressions and clicks, but also sales, there are a number of different techniques you could use that drive lots of traffic, but that don't convert very well. And so if you ignore the sales part of the experiment and you don't understand the impact it has on conversion rates and average order size, then you're missing a big chunk of the experiment. So we really recommend looking at all the metrics across the board, because you don't want to drive tons of new traffic that doesn't convert, because that'll obviously hurt your return on ad spend significantly. So the way that this looks, in terms of the outcome, is that you have a graph like this that shows before the optimization, the left-hand side of this graph, the performance between the two groups is roughly equal. You know, they change day to day and so on as they normally would. After the optimization is pushed live, you see a lift and a difference between the two groups. And in that case, you noticeably, in this case, a noticeable improvement. They're obviously still trending alongside each other, but one is obviously much higher than the other. And in those cases, what you have is clearly a positive experiment that shows a lift on this metric, and then you should roll that experiment out to others. Now, if you see the opposite true and performance suffers, you obviously want to pull the experiment and stop doing it, because you're going to hurt performance. But it's a good learning experience. So you try different things. Not every experiment is going to succeed, but if you learn from the experiment, it's always going to be a success. Okay, and just to close, let's talk about the new feed specifications. There are, this was announced about a month ago. There's a blog posting on it, and there'll be links to this below the video that's posted on YouTube. But there's some changes to the feed specs that I'll talk through very briefly, just to make sure you're aware of them. There weren't significant changes. That's the good news. In past years, there's sometimes been more significant changes to the feed specifications. This year, it's relatively minor. So one is, like I mentioned earlier, the image size is really critical. So the new minimum is 100 by 100 pixels, but consider this an absolute minimum. If you're delivering images of that quality, you probably need to look for better images, both for this kind of advertising program, but also for your own site. The example on the left is, this is a Lego Star Wars kit, but from the image quality, you can't really tell that that's the case. It's just a poor quality, stretched image, and it makes the brand look bad. And it's one that people may click through on just to figure out it's the product that they're looking for. And so you're gonna get a lot of what I call curiosity clicks that really won't convert very well. So create really good high quality images. Again, the bar should be 800 by 800 as your target or better. The minimums are 100 by 100 for non-apparel and 250 by 250 for apparel products. We've also increased the limit for image file sizes. There were cases before where there were some images that were just really super high quality that were also very big. We don't want to discourage that. We want to encourage that kind of high quality images. So we've increased the minimum or the maximum size allowed to 16 megabytes per image. Color and size are also going to be required fields in Germany, France, Japan, and UK going forward. This starts on September 1st, as the last one did as well. So starting September 1st, the color and size attributes will be required. It's been recommended for a long time, so hopefully this isn't a very big change. It's been required in the US for a little while as well. So you just want to make sure that you look through your product content and make sure you have those color and size attributes for apparel products. And finally, G10 enforcement was put in place about a month ago for most countries for Google Shopping. It'll be enforced for all countries starting next February. So G10 enforcement will be global at that point. Okay, that's it for the content. Well, I'll go through the Q&A now. Let me just take a minute to look through the questions that we have. Again, if you haven't submitted questions, please do so now. You can click on the Submit Questions button on the right-hand side of the page and submit your questions, and I'll answer them as we go through this. Okay, so let's see the questions. So in terms of the question, this question about schema.org, will Google update tax and shipping data if we have this schema data on our site? The answer is no. Right now, schema.org only works for price and availability. We recommend that tax and shipping be handled through the Merchant Center setup. There are enhancements that have happened and additional ones on the way. They'll make it much easier to define your tax and shipping rates through Merchant Center rather than through the feed or through some technique like schema.org. So we're trying to make it easier, especially for the exceptions. If you've got products that are really heavy, that have surcharges, those type of things. We really want to have, make it easy for you to set up the tax and shipping through that, as opposed to doing it through a schema.org. It's possible we may open up schema.org for other purposes. There is actually a feature of the Google Sheets implementation. There's an add-on to Google Sheets where if you have a list of all your URLs, you can run the plugin to go crawl your site to grab all that content from the schema.org tags to actually populate your entire feed. That's primarily for smaller retailers, but it's one technique for grabbing all that content using schema.org. So we're playing around with different techniques for using that. So it's one thing that you can be that you could try out if you're interested in that. But for tax and shipping, the answer right now is no. Okay, and if you again for questions, there's a Q&A app that's available. If you click the grid at the top of the video screen, it may be hidden. You may not be able to see it real well. So look for that app or look for the Q&A app if you can't see it yet. Okay. Next question. What's the best way to get product ratings displayed on shopping ads? Okay, so the way product ratings work is that there's an integration that occurs between your ratings vendor, if you have a third party that does it, and Google Shopping. So there's already integrations built between most of the major review companies and Google Shopping, so you need to authorize that transfer occur. If you have your own proprietary rating system, the reviews would be delivered to Google through a custom kind of a special feed format. And so that's an option that you can pursue as well. So that's how you get ratings into Google Shopping. Now, how do you get them displayed? The differentiation screen that I showed a few minutes ago, in that screen, there are there's the priority to which ones show up. And that changes over time as we're testing different techniques. We're trying to see what promotions, what special messaging drives the best performance. And so that'll change over time. Sometimes we show the ratings. Sometimes we show the local store availability. Sometimes we show the promotion. So it's something that the first step is make sure the ratings are in the system. And the second thing is that, based on what other activities you have to differentiate, Google will choose which ones show up. You don't have control over that aspect of it. Next question is a good question. How does a well-optimized shopping feed affect your CPC versus bidding? So it's a great question because I always look at the feed as the foundational element of your shopping campaigns. If you've got a bad quality feed, you can sometimes bid super aggressively to try to compensate for that, but it's often, you can be wasting money in that case by overcompensating for bad quality data by overbidding, as opposed to just fixing the content. That's why when I said earlier, invest in your content, and that will deliver better performance. Again, not just over Google Shopping, but for other marketing channels. So what we recommend that you do is focus first on the content, get good titles and good attributes, and make sure your products are all live. That you meet all the certain qualifications and so on, and that allows you to get all the products live and get better performance without having to go through aggressive bidding. Once you've done all the basics and all your products are live, and you've done the best practices for feed optimization, then shift your focus to campaign optimization. And there's, we'll likely have a hangout on that topic in the future as well, because there's a lot of opportunities to create really good campaign structures that can deliver great performance, but it all starts with the feed and making sure that that's solid first before you spend time focusing on optimizing your campaigns. Next question is from Dean. It says, don't larger images affect a mobile shopping experience? So yes, I mean, the image quality seems to be more important on mobile than it is on desktop, because consumers really want to understand what that product is. They're more likely to view a bigger image because the images by default are relatively small on the small screen. And because the resolution on the new phones is so good, it's really important to have high quality images on mobile. So since mobile is the majority of the traffic now, make sure you're optimizing for mobile first, and that includes creating really, really strong images. Okay, next question. I've been told by someone that a technique to optimize feeds is to duplicate products and use different titles and descriptions to maximize exposure and possibly even display the same product twice for a single search. Is that accurate? So no, it's not. That would be a reason to get suspended if you're doing those kind of things. We don't, again, let's go back to the basics. We want to create a really good consumer experience, right? And if you're playing games with the data, if you're spamming, if you're manipulating data in a way that isn't good for users, it's going to put you in a spot where you can be suspended. We obviously don't want that. That's the worst outcome you can have for your campaigns. And it's not necessary either. If you're optimizing your content the way you are, and if you have a wide selection of products, you can get coverage for almost every query that's relevant to your products just by optimizing your content. You don't need to play games by creating duplicate SKUs and things like that. It just creates a bad user experience. Create really good content, and the rest will follow. Okay, next question. Is it important to optimize product descriptions? So I didn't mention descriptions through this presentation, and in part because descriptions aren't as meaningful for traditional product listing ads and local inventory ads, but they're critically important for purchase on Google and for Google Shopping Express. So it really depends on the type of program that you're part of, because descriptions can be super important or not overly important. And so let me talk through the reasons why that is. For purchase on Google and Google Shopping Express, the transaction's taking place on a Google property, so they don't go to your retail website to see the descriptions on your own site. So it's really important to have those rich descriptions, the bullet points, the key selling points, and so on in the description, so that you can, so the consumer can see the product, understand what it is that they're buying, and be confident that they're buying the right product. So it's super important for that. For more traditional listings, description is not typically shown. It's still shown in some cases on desktop, but typically not shown a lot. And so optimization isn't as important for that field. It doesn't mean ignore it. It just means that if you're going to pay attention, like I said earlier, prioritize where you're going to have the biggest impact, and that would be optimizing your titles. But still provide good descriptions if you can. Next question. Should I add brand to the front of the title or the back? And how do we decide? So it's a great question. It really depends on the quality of the brand, right? So the brand awareness that it has. So let me kind of talk through the details of that. When you're deciding whether to include brand in title at all, the first thing to look at is whether this is a brand that people will recognize. Are people searching for it? Is it a household name? Is it something that people are likely to be drawn to? And so there are some retailers that sell products that the brand is unknown. It may be a furniture seller that the manufacturer is just an unknown store where there are unknown manufacturer that, including that manufacturer's name in the title, would actually confuse people. And so obviously there are cases that you don't want to include it at all. If you find it's a strong brand, and that's like the Apples and Nikes and so on, those strong brands are good to include in title. And you can experiment whether it's better to include in the front or the back. For the experiments that I'm familiar with, the front of the title tends to be better because it's visible in the ad when the title is truncated. And so it's often a very good technique to use. There are cases, however, where putting at the end of the title is necessary. And that's simply because sometimes you have a really long brand name. And if you're only showing the brand name in your truncated title, then you're not conveying very much information about the product. So there are cases if your brand name is very long that you want to be able to truncate it down. If your brand name is very long, put it at the end of the title instead of the beginning. It's not ideal, but it's better than hiding all of the really other critical information in the titles. So those are some of the things about product title. But again, this is a great opportunity for experimentation. Including brand and title is one of the most impactful changes that we've seen through experiments. And so it's one that if you got really strong brands, make sure you're including them in the titles. Okay, next question is from Lena on GTINs. We were under the impression that GTIN enforcement will be happening on June 16th, and now it's being postponed to 2017. And the follow-up question is, will the products without GTINs get disapproved until then, or do we still receive warnings? So let me clarify that. The GTIN enforcement for most countries occurred on May 16th, so almost a month ago. where the warnings that you were seeing for the previous few months before that have turned into errors on the May 17th, 18th timeframe. So right now, if you're in the US or UK or other countries like that, you are currently getting disapproved if a product is missing a GTIN that's required. For the other countries, so roughly half the countries the enforcement was May 16th, the other half of those countries will be enforced in February of 2017. So we're providing more time for those countries to get the GTIN information. You'll see warning messages first before you see the disapprovals. So warning messages in those countries now through February, and then you'll see disapprovals occurring in February 2017. Next question is about WordPress. Is there any good and easy way to optimize product feeds for WordPress? I'm not familiar with that, so I can't answer that question. You're happy to follow up afterwards if you've got more details about that. You can reach out to me directly with any questions that you might have. Okay, next question is about merchant promotions. If we create an exclusive promo code for Google Shopping, and the promo code is pushed on Google Shopping as a promotion, but the code does not appear on the landing page, but the promo code will work. Essentially, will the promo offer be valid? So in other words, if the promo code is not visible on the landing page, what will happen? And I believe what will happen is that the promo won't be approved unless it's visible. So if you create a Google Shopping promotion, you want to make sure that when the person clicks through from the Google ad to your landing page, that the promo is visible. It can be visible only to that user. So you can do a parameter pass that says, show that promo code on the landing page. If the person's coming from Google Shopping, that's perfectly fine. So you don't have to show it to the whole world, just to those users. But if the click-through to the retailer site doesn't show the promotion code anywhere, I believe the promotion offer will be disapproved. And I think we have time probably for one more question here. All right. This question is, should I add the MPN, the manufacturer part number, to titles? This is an interesting one. We've run experiments on this because sometimes when consumers are searching, they're searching for the manufacturer part number because they know exactly what they want to buy, and those users will convert well. So we've run experiments in this area, and we found that they were mostly inconclusive. And so we don't recommend, there's not data that recommends including the manufacturer part number in titles. Sometimes we saw a negative outcome when that occurred. We can't explain exactly why, but it's something that if you have products that are very likely to be searched on by MPN, it's worth running an experiment to see whether it works, but just be cautious because you may not see the performance lift that you expect. So with that, I really want to thank everyone for participating in today's Hangout. Thank you for all the great questions. This video will be posted onto the Google Shopping YouTube page. And below the video, there'll be links to different content that was mentioned throughout the presentation, so you can link through to that content and learn more about that. And again, as a reminder, the previous Hangouts are also available on YouTube if you want to refresh your knowledge of feed basics or GTIN requirements. Thank you very much.